Let's briefly now talk about networking. I won't go into this too much because we'll talk about it on May 3rd in part 2, but I do want to highlight a few things really quickly because for those of you who want to get a jump start on this, networking is really important to do in a way that's professional and that's respectful. So just some of the key things to think about. Networking can often get a bad rap as being something opportunistic or transactional, okay? So to avoid that, you want to approach people through compassion, empathy, and genuine interest in who they are and what they enjoy. So it says Canadian big law, but this also applies to New York. To secure a role in any big law firm, you want to build a relationship with someone inside the firm, ideally, who can champion you to the legal recruitment team. So if you're reaching out to network with a summer student, an associate, or a partner, you want to get them to like you enough that they want to tell other people about you. So this can happen in one of 3 ways. You can do informal coffee chats with alumni from your school, either your undergraduate institution or law school that are currently at firms in New York, contacts that you make, say via LinkedIn, that you can reach out to. If there are guest speakers that have come to do a panel discussion on New York jobs at your school, you can reach out to them. And again, summer students are really important. So if there's any summer students from last year who are heading to New York in the next couple months, you want to talk to them or have done previous summers in New York. Remember that the screening interview process, which is round 1, is also an opportunity to build relationships, okay? What this means is that even the few people you'll meet through the screening process can become champions for you. Follow up with them after the screening process. Tell them how much you enjoyed meeting them. Tell them how much you loved the firm. You never know how even that encounter can feed back in your favor. And then in the formal interview process, where you're likely to meet a lot of partners and associates, take note of who they are. Because even if you don't land the job at that particular firm, that's part of your network that you're growing. So any interaction basically is an opportunity to build relationships. That's the bottom line there. The other piece to networking here is to start early. Ignore the first bullet because that's really about the Canadian firms. But when it comes to New York, what you want to do is you're not going to have the chance, not everyone's going to have the chance to actually fly down to New York and meet with people in person, okay? So you'll want to set up Zoom calls or coffee chats for the most part, just electronically or virtually. That's respectful of people's times. There's something I wanted to share with you guys. A lot of people who work in New York don't actually live in New York. There's a lot of people who work in New York where they go in 2 or 3 days a week, but for the most part, they live in Connecticut, or they'll live, in Long Island, or they'll live somewhere outside of Manhattan. So to really get in time, face time with somebody in person is increasingly hard. So if you're going to network ahead of the recruit and you're not flying down ahead of actually getting interviews, make sure that you set things up virtually in a flexible way that accommodates somebody else's schedule. You want to make sure as well that in these coffee chats, you are demonstrating your interest in the firm, interest in the person, and that you're somebody who's a valuable investment of their time. So if you want, prior to that coffee chat, send them your resume. Let them know a little bit about you so that they're excited to talk to you when the time comes. In terms of networking, you also want to think about developing relationships from now with alumni from your school who are at the firms. So go on LinkedIn Premium and actually do a quick search. Who's an alum from my law school currently in New York? Find out people who are from the same hometown, high school, religious community, ethnic community, athletic group. And the more you have in common with someone, the more they see themselves in you. Those people are historically more likely to vouch for you than someone who has no overlap in the same interests. Remember that your networking endeavors are likely to be more successful if you are introduced by someone else or you have this kinship affiliation rather than simply cold outreach. The last thing is that any networking you do will be wasted unless you know what you want to walk away with. If you don't know someone very well, you should have a preliminary ask of them. So an ask is what you want to walk away with from the conversation. A preliminary ask could be something like getting more information on what makes a firm different, learning more about their practice area, what their experience in the recruitment process is like and what tips they have for you, That would be preliminary. If you have a more strong relationship with somebody, let's say they're an alumni from your school, you can ask them whether they'd be willing to introduce you to other people at the firm who they've worked with or who they know and like. You can ask them for another follow-up coffee chat later. You can also ask them, what advice they would have to differentiate you from other candidates. If you have a strong relationship or you really get along with someone, then you can go a step further in that coffee chat or that networking engagement and ask them to review your cover letter and resume. You can ask to meet in person in New York when you're down there to interview. You can ask them to make introductions to key decision makers, like the chief talent officer or managing partner. So it's up to you to evaluate what stage of familiarity or closeness you have when you're engaging in networking and how much you're willing to ask of that person who you're networking with. But don't ask someone you've only just met, can you review my cover letter and resume? Don't jump right there. It might be too much. But you can say, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the firm, its culture, and how you think I could make my application more competitive, or what advice you would have. So let's now talk finally about the application and interview process, okay? There are several ways to apply to firms in New York. The first is directly on the website via an application portal, which will be very obvious. It may not come out till May, so if you don't see it right now, check back in on the firm's website closer to the time. Remember that you want to go to the Vault 100, just type that in Google, go to the Vault 100 site to find out the top 100 firms to apply to. I would say applying to about 50 is a safe bet, okay? But each firm will have different instructions on who to send it to or where to apply if it is a portal. The next way to apply is through the resume collect that some schools do, where career development offices at law schools will gather all the resumes and then send them off to specific firms. This tends not to happen until the end of July, and because of that rolling offer basis and that rolling offer system, I'm encouraging you not to wait on that. So if there are 10 firms that participate in resume collect, just go ahead and email them directly. The resume collect process happens way too late for that to be sufficiently useful. You can always do both, but I recommend going straight to the firm. Same with on-campus interviews. U of T has end of July on-campus interviews. I don't recommend waiting until the end of July. You should be applying to those firms directly. If those firms come back to you and say, wait till the on-campus interview process, that's a different story, but you shouldn't assume that that's the best way. The other way to apply to a firm is to engage in those networking chats I just spoke about and have that networking contact pass your resume along directly to HR. This is known as an internal referral and can be very, very persuasive. Step 2, and by the way, in the May 3rd presentation, we'll talk a lot more about interview prep, but just so you're aware, anyone who lands a New York job goes through a 2-part interview process: the screening interview and the formal interview, the final in-person one. The screening interview is typically virtual. It's 20 to 30 minutes. It'll typically be with a partner, and they will grill you on every bullet on your resume. They'll ask you for a clear and compelling narrative. They'll cut to the chase on any weaknesses that they see. And you're going to get, without question, asked 3 things: why New York, why that firm in particular, and what practice area you're interested in and why. In the New York question, the why New York question, you are going to have to be able to explain why not Canada. So it's both positive why New York and also why not Canada. And there are specific things that you need to say in that response that I will tell you about on May 3rd. So make sure you tune into the part 2 of this workshop. The final round interview always happens in person in New York, where you will be flown down by the firm. You will be put up at a hotel and they will pay for the whole thing, including your meals. It's 1 to 2 hours in length. You'll be with multiple interviewers at the associate and partner level, and you may be taken out for lunch or coffee after. In the in-person interview, the questions will be fairly substantive. They may ask you to discuss a recent case. They may ask you to talk to them about, your favorite courses or, a particular piece of written work that you've done in class. They may ask you to choose a recent corporate deal or transaction and explain why it's interesting. They may ask you about your grades and to explain why some of them are Bs and why some of them didn't go the way that you expected. So you will get hardball questions. You'll also get the softball ones. Like, so what do you love most about the potential of living in New York? What do you like to do for fun? That sort of thing. You should also have questions ready for the firm. because it is a two-way interview. And again, we'll go into this more in depth on May 3rd. Here are the ultimate keys to success, and I want to set these expectations for you from now. You have to be prepared for the fast-paced, competitive nature of the environment that you're going into. This is the fastest, most competitive legal market in the world, so you have to be mentally, emotionally, and physically prepared for long hours. You should also be prepared for the reality that you are on call 24/7. This means you may never get your weekends, you may have to cancel vacations last minute, and you may be working through the night. As long as you understand that the money that you are getting, the compensation you are getting financially, is in return for you giving up your time and your freedom. You will also do well in New York if you know yourself and develop confidence in who you are, rather than expecting praise or external forms of validation, really building up your internal sense of self-worth and self-esteem. That's the best way to outlast the competition. If you feel like you need support developing this mental, emotional, and physical resilience, or you need help navigating this competitive process, make sure that you book a call with me, and I'll drop it in the chat again, because that's the best way to do this, is to make sure that you're not trying to do this on your own. You only get one kick at the can to make a strong first impression. You definitely don't want to miss that opportunity to do it right.